Hello, this is RICKY, the Android guy. Today we're going against the two biggest tablets out on the market, which is the Asus Prime versus the new iPad. Remember, not the iPad 3, the new iPad. Alright, now we're going to be going over a couple of things to test them out and see which one is the best for your money. First, we'll get right down to it, screen quality. The iPad has the win for the bigger resolution, and just show you what that means. Again, I don't zoom in all the way because neither will your eyes. So in terms of text clarity, iPad will be slightly sharper. However, the font is actually sharper on the Asus Prime just because of the Android 4.0 Roboto font. It's a lot thinner and just crisper compared to I forget what the iPad's called, Hysteria or something like that, or Hesperia or something like that. Those are going to be the two fonts that each operating system uses. So in comparing them, the iPad will have a slight advantage, but again, unless you're 15 inches or closer, your eyes cannot tell the difference. And in terms of brightness, it's going to be a little different because the Asus has a brighter screen overall. The iPad is only still an IPS Plus screen, whereas the Asus Prime is an IPS Plus screen. So as soon as you push this IPS Plus, you can actually see it outside. It's still one of only two tablets which you can see outside. With none of the iPads you can see outside. So it's still a major downside that for some reason they didn't make it brighter. I don't know why, it just seemed like a logical choice. I'm sure it'll be on the new iPad. Now let's go to books. How does the book experience go on each of these two? And in terms of books, again, we do have a different layout in, before I zoom in iOS versus Android 4.0. And that is that Android, you get more landscape, so you have a two-page view, which makes you feel more like you're reading a book. And whereas the iPad, it only has a one-page view, and not it does have an animation, but it doesn't actually move with your finger, whereas on Android it's more intuitive and actually moves with your finger. But now let's zoom into the text. And on this, again, you really can't tell too much difference. One thing though, the Asus Prime definitely shows more natural tones in comparison to the Apple. You see that there's a little bit more saturated, so the white actually looks like blue, whereas on the Asus Prime it actually does look like a white page. Alright, that's the books comparison. And let's go home. And now let's check out the web browsing. So I'm just going to pop up this one, I'm going to pop up this one, and let's just go to website. Let's go to the website here. Let's load up here, and I'll put it landscape just because that's how we actually view our websites. So let me zoom out a little bit, and yeah, so when we see the comparison to the two, we definitely see that obviously you get the full website when it comes to Android just because you can view Flash. And when you're viewing text, they're going to be rather comparable. On Android you do get more of a full screen just because it is a 16:9 ratio, so it is what websites are designed for. As you can see, everything is a little bit scrunched up on the iPad. In comparison though to the text itself, both relatively sharp in comparison to it. Definitely no big difference. If you are as close as I am right now, which is within 10 inches, then yeah, it'll definitely make a difference. But if at the rate you're viewing it at, it won't make too much of a difference. So it's going to be in web browsing. Oh, on Android, just a quick thing, you do have two different type of web browsers. Chrome will be the much faster one out of any web browser on operating system right now. It's just the fastest HTML5 browser, and then there's the regular stock browser, which does do Flash better. So you have two choices. On Apple, you can download other browsers as well, but it just costs you money. Now, oh, actually, you know what? I'll leave it landscape, and we're going to go to photos. Let's see how photos look on each of these. Photos here and photos here. Alright, so when viewing a photo on the two, you'll definitely notice that it is going to be a little bit different in terms of how the photo is. Let me move that a little bit back. So in terms of how the photo is, if we zoom into it a little bit, you can definitely notice that the Android Asus Prime will have a little bit more natural tones, and the new iPad has a little bit more saturation, especially noticeable on the red. Let's try another picture here. Oops, that's the camera. So again, in comparison to them, just a little bit more saturation on here, a little bit more natural tones here. So just depending on your preference, you can kind of see what you like more. And lastly, so yep, again, just a little bit more on the natural side here, which is a preference if you like more natural, realistic colors, or if you want a little bit more saturation on it. And while we're on that, let's go straight to movies. Okay, so we're going to pull up a YouTube video on here, and we're going to pull up a YouTube video on here, and then we're just going to play them at the same time and see how they look. Sorry, I didn't have that loaded, and
you were made to be ruled.
so definitely a comparison between the two. Movies have never been the iPad's strong point, just simply because of the fact that you don't have a true movie watching experience because it's a 4:3 ratio. So you'll definitely notice it's a lot more squished in comparison, as well as not only does it feel a little bit squished, but it has black bars on it, so you just don't even get the full view of a movie. Whereas on the Asus Prime, you get the full 16:9 ratio, so it definitely stands out. Alright.
So when we needed them.
In terms of speakers, they're both pretty comparable. Both have a mono speaker at the top right of each of them, so definitely stand out in terms of that.
Gentlemen, what are you?
Alright, and now speed difference. Speed difference easily goes to the Asus Transformer Prime, just simply because it is a quad-core processor versus simply only a dual-core processor. So even things like moving across, it just moves a lot quicker in comparison. Even with an animation on the background, which is a live wallpaper, that does something useful, which is tell you the battery life of your current tablet. It just definitely moves a lot quicker, and the fact that you can put even more widgets on it, it moves so much quicker. So in terms of speed, there is just no comparison between the two. It will be the Asus Transformer, just simply because it's only a dual-core 1 GHz processor on the new iPad versus the Asus Prime having a quad-core 1.5 processor. So just doesn't stand a chance. In terms of multitasking, both exhibit being able to jump from app to app. Oops. And we'll just load some of the same things we did before. And one thing we have noticed, as if you have seen our previous videos, is that sometimes when you jump to certain apps, they'll go quicker, and sometimes other ones will take longer. And it's just something that each OS has. So in terms of multitasking, it's definitely something that they both just kind of exhibit almost no lag time really. However, that was a screen capture, something you can actually do on the Transformer Prime that you can't do on the iPad. Now, one thing that's going to be different though in terms of multitasking is to kill an app on Apple. It just basically, if you start off right here, you have to double tap it, hold this part down, and then end it. It's just a little bit longer compared to Android 4.0 and its elegance, which is just when you pull up a multi-screen, you just swipe away. And it's just a lot more intuitive. It's a lot better built. So it's definitely better in terms of multitasking to actually close down your apps that you're not using or have recently used. In terms of cameras, let's go right to them. See the photos we've taken with our camera. Oops. One thing definitely the iPad lacks is a back button. Photos, and let's go over here. So, in terms of camera taking, let me turn the brightness down. Again, the Asus Prime is definitely the brighter one, so it will even outshine my camcorder. In comparison to them, you definitely get more of a backlit picture with the Asus Prime. You have a lot more light in the background, whereas even without the LED, just because simply the backlit picture, it seems the backlighting is stronger on the Asus Prime in comparison to the new iPad. So definitely even like the wood in the background has a much brighter picture, and all of the screen even seems a lot more richer in color. Which in the comparison to them, you definitely just see that each picture is definitely brighter in comparison, and also the megapixels will come in handy from the 8 megapixel on the Asus Prime compared to the 5 megapixel on the new iPad. When you zoom in, you have much sharper text and just a lot more pixels for a lot more clarity. Alright, now let's go to pricing. Well, the price of the new iPad has not changed from its predecessor. You have a $499 tablet for a 16 gigabyte. However, the Asus Prime definitely gives you the more value for your money in terms of it is a 32 gig for $499. So you get double the storage for the same price point. However, you also still have ports, meaning you have a micro SD card slot where you can add in storage, and micro HDMI so you can connect it directly to your TV. So it's just nice having ports built in instead of always having to get adapters like you do with the iPad. So just another thing that stands out, but definitely the more bang for your buck you are getting with the Asus Transformer Prime. Conclusions, definitely still always go down to the OS, as I've always explained to people. If you have, an iPhone, an iTouch, a MacBook Pro, obviously you'd be foolish not to get an iPad. However, if you have a computer or an Android phone, or are just new to tablets in general, Android will be a much better experience for you, and you don't need to get everything from one area. The downside about the new iPad is it's still an iOS device, meaning that everything has to come from iTunes. Everything is inclusive. So if you're already in that ecosystem, it's great. But if you're not, it just doesn't do anything for you. Whereas if you have no experience in any ecosystem right now, or if you have a PC or Android phone in general, obviously you're going to be going with the more open, that you can have your own file manager, put whatever kind of documents you want, whatever kind of files you want, movies, anything, and it'll be able to play it. Alright. Well, if you have any other questions about the two, feel free to ask. This is RICKY, the Android Guy.